Thank you so much for braving the rain this morning. It's great to see all your sunny smiles on faces this morning and starting our day with Leadership Austin Engaged Breakfast. I'm Judy Maggio. I head up a group called Decibel. We are the News and Public Affairs arm of Austin PBS, KLRU. So thanks again for being here, and we have a great timely topic for you. It is power, equity, and philanthropy, a very timely topic, a very important topic in this community. Before we begin, though, I am going to introduce my friend and Austin Board Chair of Leadership Austin, Dr. Colette Pierce Burnett, to share just a few words of welcome. Dr. Burnett?
Well, good morning, everyone. I want to echo what Judy said. Thank you for being here through the rain, the storm. Someone was telling me that it stormed really bad last night. I didn't hear a thing. So thank you for being here this morning. I have the honor of serving as the president of Houston-Tillotson University, but even this morning I come to you in my capacity as the board chair of Leadership Austin, a role that I'm humbled and honored to serve in. The mission of Leadership Austin, if you haven't taken time to just go to our website and look us up, it's really a phenomenal organization tuned into the fabric of Austin, Texas, Central Texas, particularly here in Austin. So these engaged breakfasts are an example of the type of work that we do, and the purpose of the breakfasts it's threefold: to inform, is to share information about a community issue, perspectives, to hear a perspective that's different than your own, to stretch us out of our comfort zone so that we start just viewing things through a different lens, and then to act. We want you to leave the room to do something. It may be as simple as sharing with a friend something that you heard, writing down a nugget that you put in front of you, how you operate during your day, but to do something that's going to in some way advance your own life or the lives of others. So the topic this morning is one that I'm just really excited about, and it's power, equity, and philanthropy. Because in my everyday role, my job that I get benefits from, that's my role, is to raise money. And I run up against this issue a lot about equity and fundraising and equity and philanthropy. So thank you for being here. And before I take my seat, I want to see if two of our alums are here, Robin Birchfield, Essential Class of 2019, and Beanie Coleman from Essential Class of 2018. Robin and Beanie, are you here? Could you stand up, please? So in this area, follow those beautiful people, because we have heard that people want to continue the dialogue, continue engaging. So for alums that are interested in doing that, we ask you to go back and you'll have a round table, a tech talk.
It could be a TED Talk.
We'll make it a TED Talk.
That's right.
I said tech, but I really said TED. It'll be a mini TED Talk. So I encourage you to do that to keep the conversation going. So it's a great moment for me to be grateful, and you'll see our many sponsors on the screen behind our esteemed panelists and Judy. But it's the St. David's Healthcare, Texas Gas Service, Wells Fargo, and Austin Community Foundation. We cannot do it without those sponsors. So if you can give them all a round of applause. And our presenting sponsor is Ascension Seton. So it's my pleasure to welcome Miguel Romano, who is the president of Foundations and a Leadership Austin Essential alum. And someone I keep running into in the community, so I'm going to call him a friend of mine. Miguel, thank you.
It's a great way to start the day when she calls you your friend, so thank you very much for that. My name is Miguel Romano. I'm president of the Ascension Seton Foundation. I'm very proud to be here representing our organization at this event and the lively debate we're going to have in the conversation. But I've also got to say, coming here makes me feel very nostalgic. It reminds me of my days of Leadership Austin. And the conversations, the debates, the thoughtful provoking of ideas that started, not only started during that time, but also stays with you. And it's amazing to see the organization continue that in a public forum. And I've got to say, those conversations took me, a private sector guy, and motivated me and prompted me to come to the nonprofit side, right? And what I've realized is the very conversation we're going to have not only takes place in the nonprofit, but also the for-profit, the private sector. So I think you'll find a lot of the things that we were going to be talking about and this panel is going to enlighten us with really is translatable not only by sector, but by region and by industry. So I, like you, and like our organization, very, very interested to watch this conversation today. So thank you very much for being here. Thank you for letting us be part of this. And like you, we're excited to be and watch. Thank you.
Thank you, Miguel and Ascension Seton. And I really wasn't kidding. I've witnessed some of the alumni corners, and they could be a TED Talk. There are some powerful conversations going on at the alumni corners. So those of you who can stick around, I hope you do. A few bits of business before we get started. If you post on social media, don't forget to use the hashtag LeadEngage and tag Leadership Austin at LeadershipATX. Our Decibel team, and I'd like to point out we have an all-female team this morning. Go Decibel. We are live streaming on our Decibel ATX Facebook page. Once again, this is the News and Public Affairs arm of Austin PBS. If you want to share this conversation on Facebook, just look for Decibel ATX and share from there if you would. We have really, really enjoyed this partnership with Leadership Austin. We are often covering the very same community issues, and this gives us one more way to bring people to the table and search for real solutions. Also, it's going to be uploaded to YouTube and will live on the Leadership Austin site. So this is another great way for folks who can't make it through the rain to the library or come downtown on an early Wednesday morning. Please find it on YouTube, share with people and in groups that you think might also want to engage in this topic and have some vital conversations about it. As is tradition with Leadership Austin, we invite all of the audience, everyone here today, all of you watching online, to ask some questions. And you can do that by texting them in. There are directions there on your screen right there. And I want to introduce Courtney Bailey with Leadership Austin. Courtney is the head of the Engaged Breakfast Series and the Essential Program. She is your voice today. She will be checking out those questions, looking for themes, and then asking our esteemed panel some of your questions this morning. So we thank you for engaging in that way, too. So let's jump right into our discussion. I want to introduce our wonderful panel this morning. First, we have Denise Herrera. She is the Senior Capacity Building Officer at the St. David's Foundation, where she focuses much of her time on measurement and impact of the St. David's Foundation, which of course is one of the largest health foundations in the entire country. And then we have Becky Lentz. Dr. Lentz is a faculty fellow at the University of Texas at Austin, the RGK Center for Philanthropy. Then we have Elias Saluhaddin, who is the Director of Development for the Texas Empowerment Academy. I'm learning more about it this morning. It sounds like a wonderful place. It's an elementary charter school in East Austin with a student base that is primarily African American. And finally, down on the end, we have Suhaila Waheed. She is the founder of Giving Geek. I love this company's name. This is a development agency that seeks to improve communities through inclusive philanthropic strategy, technology advancement, and through sustainable programs. Thank you all also for braving the rain and getting up early this morning to share your expertise and insight with us. Becky, I'm going to put you on the spot first because I want you to kind of give us a big picture. What are some of the grounding principles of social justice philanthropy? And how can funders translate those principles into actual practice?
Sure. It's okay. Can you hear me? Thank you. This is really a great opportunity to kind of make visible a practice in philanthropy that is pretty much working behind the scenes and less flamboyant, I think, than most of the other kinds of work that happens. So I'm speaking to you about this really briefly to set the stage, and I won't talk long and really look forward to Q&A, but I was a former grant maker at the Ford Foundation and also am an academic, and I work sort of at the intersection of research, teaching, and practice in this field. But I would say generally the social justice philanthropy from the literature and from practitioners that I work and talk with and interview for my own work is something that we call change, not charity. So if you imagine a scale of, let's say on my little diagram, there's arrows going two different directions, and there's a bunch of bubbles that go between them. On one end of the scale of philanthropic work, we have what we call projects and ways of doing this work that accept existing structures of power. power relationships. So for example, on the most extreme end is, and it's, all of this is good, there's nothing right or wrong, it's just different types of work, is direct service. So for example, operating a shelter or food bank and these kinds of things. So it's really about direct service, distributing goods and things that don't necessarily challenge the politics of why people are homeless in the first place. On the complete opposite end are those kinds of investments and the work that goes with it, which challenge existing power relationships. And it's inherently political, but it's not necessarily overtly political in terms of working with election campaigns and these kinds of things. And this is where we have projects about direct action. So the idea, and there's various principles and ways that this work gets done, but basically the idea is to decenter the power relationship and put those who are most close to the problems in the grant-making role. So the funder is the facilitator, the partner, the ally, and it shifts actually in the practice of giving the power relationships of who's doing that work. So that's sort of a helpful frame.
Great. Great overview. Thank you, Becky. Denise, I'm going to turn to you now because St. David's is the big dog in town. You know, you guys give so much money to local nonprofits and community partners. In 2018, it was $63 million in grant making throughout Central Texas, throughout the region. So I'm wondering, how do you measure, how do you ensure that that grant money is aligned with the community needs?
Thank you, Judy. That's actually one of my favorite questions, talking about measurement and outcomes and impact. How do we do that? Because it's not easy. First and foremost, I will share that at St. David's Foundation, we're really excited about going from counting to becoming a more learning organization and learning, reflecting, and iterating as we go alongside our grant partners. So the four main ways that we measure impact so far is, direct report from our grant partners. Sometimes we're able to engage an external facilitator and evaluator to help them really assess their impact and what they're learning and how they can improve upon their services or their practices. The second way is, we work with Center for Effective Philanthropy. About 2 years ago, we released the Grantee Perception Survey, which is an anonymous survey to all of our grant partners to let us know how we're doing. So it's kind of an internal report card. And we were able to reflect on that, and in early 2018 and again in 2019, we were able to share back to the field what we heard and at least 3 things that we were going to do about that. The third way that we really help assess impact and whether or not we're really doing what the community needs for us to do and help support is through our community health needs assessment. So we're really proud that in 2019 we were able to partner with others such as Ascension Seton and Bastrop County Cares and other folks in the community that also do a community health needs assessment. So that way we could reduce burden on our grant partners in the community. And this is really a way for us to gather feedback. What are the problems that our neighbors identify in their own communities? What are some potential solutions that they're trying to work toward, and how can we as funders help support that? And then the fourth way that we really measure impact, we really believe that whoever tells the best story wins. So we're trying to get better about telling the qualitative story, not just the numbers about who's being impacted, how many and when, but also how is that actually happening. And I will say that we're really excited to embark on working with rural communities. We know that that's not new to philanthropy, but it's new to us. And so our senior program officer, Abena Asante, is really helping us all to become better storytellers and to have the community tell their own stories.
Storytelling really is key to all of this. And Elias, I want you to tell us a little bit about the story of the Texas Empowerment Academy. And I'm sure that there are certain challenges that you face with funding for your programs. And do you think these challenges would be different or maybe less obvious if you served a different population?
Thank you. I'm with Texas Empowerment Academy, and we are a arts and technology charter school, K through 12. We've got about 400 African-American, a majority African-American youth in Austin, here in Austin, and found the organization by chance. I was looking for how do I give back to the Black community, and I stumbled upon the school. They've been around for 20 years, and I didn't know about them, and most stakeholders that I bring to the campus, they're like, wow, we never knew that this organization existed in Austin. And I think that has been the challenge for the charter school is as they were growing, they've just kind of had their head in the community. They started from the community, kind of off the grid, and really didn't bring those build those relationships, funding relationships as they evolved. And so that's what they brought me around to do is help them shed light on the good work that they're doing. One of the things that they do different that I think that than other charter schools are doing is they're teaching their kids about the culture and their history every day. Doctors, lawyers, philanthropists, engineers, and so the kids start to see themselves different in the community and who they are, where they came from, and where they can go. And I can tell you that has a tremendous effect on their psyche, right? And knowing who they are and where they can go and what they can accomplish. And so I mentioned, I think the school just didn't have those relationships going forward, and that's been a challenge. And I've seen other organizations that have popped up in the community because they've had those funding relationships in the community, and they've been able to grow. And so so yeah, I've seen it. And so that does not have to be the case moving forward. I think in the future that we shouldn't have to, I've worked for large organizations, and by being in those organizations, I've been connected to different relationships, but that shouldn't have to be the fact in regards to philanthropy, in regards to having to go work for somebody that's a larger organization to get connected.
And Suhaila, congratulations on starting your business.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I wonder if you had some advice for other young professionals, particularly for those from underrepresented backgrounds who may want to carve out some space in the philanthropy world as you have.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you for that. We made it to 1 year, so.
Yay!
I told my sister yesterday, I was like, we're still out here, so, just keep hope alive. But yeah, I think that for me, the inspiration to go ahead and venture out on my own while still being a young professional who is learning and growing came from realizing that I do have a perspective that is valuable and that could apply to many different people, no matter what background you come from. And so once I realized and recognized how important it was for my voice to be in a room, I said, hey, well, why not make a full career out of this, and why not start now? I think that for a while I kind of expected myself to, carve out my own path as I got a little bit older, and I really kind of had to sit and think about why I was waiting. And once I realized that I could have more of an impact if I pushed myself a little bit harder, I began to see that maybe this is the path that I should take. And then the other thing I believe is just that if there's something that I'm passionate about, if there's something that I want to speak about, if there's a different element of my philanthropic journey that I want to uncover, I have to do that. It is my responsibility to take on those social issues that I, feel like need to be handled head on. And so I just felt like there was no need to waste any more time.
Well, you're not wasting any time.
Thank you.
I have a big picture question for all of you, and I want to set it up with a statistic. So this is according to a study by the D5 Coalition, which is a collection of grant-making organizations dedicated to advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion in philanthropy. So here's the statistic. 80% of foundation staff, 91% of foundation CEOs are white. How can the philanthropic community address this obviously critical need for inclusion and representation? What are some ways we can do that? Who wants to start with that one? Go ahead, Elise.
Well, I would say there's nothing better than a little pressure, right? And a lot of the foundations, they hold the purse, they have the power of the purse, and what if we told the charities that we're giving money to, the next 3 to 5 years, how are you going to use your power, your privilege, your position to really embed and immerse yourself in the communities that you're serving, so that you're not just serving the communities, but they're of service to your organization as well. I'm a former foster kid who was in the foster care system for 15 years. And so that was the seed that they used to plant in me, that, you're going to graduate from high school, you're going to graduate from college, but you're also going to be a productive member in the community, and you're going to serve and you're going to give back, right? And so when I'm sitting and I'm at a gala or a luncheon and I'm seeing and a kid is speaking, what I'm thinking in my mind, it's great, that's a success story. But our success stories have to be of service to us. They have to become future donors, future volunteers, future staff members. And so we have to really embed ourselves in the community. And philanthropy is the love of humanity, right? And so that has to be across the board and that's got to be part of our culture. And the culture that we embed is not just organizational culture, but community culture, and walking hand to hand with those communities. And so immersion is the best thing that we can do. And so put a little pressure on these organizations to really embed themselves in the community as much as they can.
I'd like to build upon that, if that's okay. I totally agree with what you said about really investing in the communities that we aim to serve and it being inclusive. And I would add another layer before that. So as a funder, I believe we need to look at our own reflection in the mirror. So for example, we started collecting board and staff diversity data of our grant partners, and my question is always, what does our data look like? Have we assessed that first? And are we prepared to help our grant partners diversify themselves? And are we allowing ourselves to go through that process as well? And frankly, if we don't know how to do that as a foundation, then we should engage folks who can help, like the National Commission for Responsive Philanthropy, our colleagues, the new philanthropists who are in the room. Mission Capital has gone through their own internal journey to really do some of that self-reflection, do an equity audit, especially as foundations do have some resources. We do have some purses and some backpacks and other tools. If we cannot figure this out on our own, then we need to engage other partners to help us do that for ourselves as an institution and also for the community.
I also want to say too, you guys brought up some very good points, and like you just mentioned, I think that equity audit is very important. And as an entrepreneur, you want to make sure that your company, organization, small business, there's integrity to the various policies in your, in the company of the people that you have around you. And so I think that it's important to make sure that just like you provide insurance or you provide time off, that you make sure that you apply various diverse circumstances for the people that you serve and all of the different ways that you expand, if that makes sense. So basically, I would just say to make sure that if you want to grow as a company, that you're holding yourself accountable, and take the time out to speak to those individuals who know what they're talking about, and hire people who can encourage a better company or organizational policy that'll bring in different diverse backgrounds that'll only benefit the growth of your organization.
Yep, sorry. Excuse me. Excuse me. I wanted to echo everybody's comments too, that I think what happens in philanthropy, I kind of fell into it, so at the time, a lot of people don't go to philanthropy school, although there's more opportunities now, and then you find yourself in this thing. I just got hired because I knew something about the field they wanted me to invest in. And then I faced all these questions, which was, why is it, part of it is asking your grantees, but also yourself, who are you accountable to? And I think that that's the question that doesn't often happen in the practice. And it's not necessarily that there isn't a good intention, which you're right, the love of humanity, but the problem is that the funding community tends to be very insular. It talks to itself. It's partly because when you have a lot of funding to give, you feel like fly paper to flies everywhere you go. And I think it's sometimes that for safety reasons, a lot of people tend to be wagons in a circle, as mixed metaphors that I'm doing here. But I think that you're right, that there's a lot of need to pressure from the outside, but also from the inside. What I've experienced at the time that I was doing this work is that you have to organize, you have to be an organizer within philanthropy. Mm-hmm. So you basically work across these things to create your own affinity groups and all that kind of thing, but you become an organizer, you're not just a grant maker. Yeah.
Elias, you said, looked like you had one more thing to add.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one more thing, and I think there's a lot of, there's a lot of grassroots organizations that are doing transformational work that their applications don't get to the table, or they don't know how to navigate the philanthropic world. As you just mentioned, when you go into philanthropy, I mean, it's an evolving industry, right? And so what I would like to see is when foundations give money to organizations that they also ask them, who are you partnering with on a grassroots level? Who are you mentoring? Who are you just introduce us to other organizations that are out there that may not have their application in front of us. And so the door gets open to other organizations and individuals who are just doing really, really good work that many of us aren't aware of. And so I'd like to see more of that.
Beautiful answers. And I'm wondering what the audience has on its mind today, Courtney.
So what should be the role of philanthropy in big policy and advocacy?
Big policy and advocacy. What's the role of philanthropy?
Huge.
Can you elaborate?
Well, I think most of you involved in this work probably already know that philanthropy itself can't be perceived as doing advocacy. So there's a lot of ways you can help advocates do their work. For example, I was investing in the burgeoning field back when in media justice. And so in a way, what you do, and there's a lot of different strategies, you invest in basically, as you say, find those partners and ask them, who their partners are, and have them help you figure out how to give general support to those organizations, not project support. So if you fund a program, they still need to keep the lights on, so, and also this idea of multi-year funding. So there's a long view when you invest in policy advocacy that goes from, movement building, basically grassroots movement building, but also issue advocacy, and there's a whole assortment of investment strategies that need to be thought through with the people that are actually doing the work.
So I'm going to set up the next question as well, and it's just kind of another broad stroke question with some information. A recent article published in the Stanford Social Innovation Review stated that philanthropy must shift from the position of gatekeeper to the role of ally and partner. And this really echoes some of the things that we've already talked about this morning, but how can philanthropic organizations cultivate greater trust within communities and break down this inevitable power dynamic that comes with giving and receiving money?
I would like to say I think that one of the most important factors to transition into being an ally and being a partner is by joining in the conversation, by being a part of the conversation, by volunteering with everyone else that you're giving to, and by not separating yourself completely from the surge of emotion and, thriving of a people. I think that it's important to just, for one, get engaged and do your best to connect with the grassroots organizations that you do support financially.
I totally agree with that. And the one thing that I think about a lot, as I probably mentioned, is proximity and immersion. How do I immerse myself in a physical way? And I think that's harder to go out and just jump into a community. Jump in and just get involved. But there's little things that you can do as a personal level, as your personal plan. What can I do this week? What can I do next month, this year? What is your personal plan? And the easiest thing is, and there's tons of scholars and authors and literature out there that could help you in an academic way, really learn more about yourself and things that you can do to just be more educated about the communities that we're serving. And so it's not, how do we fix the communities? It's not how do we change the communities, but what are the communities doing well and how can we support that? And where am I in my position, my power, and my immersiveness? And so it's
A real introspective approach. Anybody else want to talk about breaking down that power dynamic?
I will add one small, simple thing that I think foundations can do. Take a cold call from somebody that you don't know. There are a lot of program officers out there that aren't willing to talk to somebody because they receive an email from an organization they've never heard of or a phone call, and they're simply not willing to have that conversation. So I think that is a small, simple thing any program officer or staff member can do. The community is coming to us with their dream. It is not my job to shatter their dream, and even though their idea or their important project might not fit squarely into St. David's funding buckets, I might be able to connect them with some other resources in the community or even nationally that would be a better fit. So take the cold call.
I want to talk about Austin specific, and those of us who call Austin home know all about inequities and the rapid growth here and the concern over affordability and gentrification and the entrenched segregation that has existed in our community for so many years. Is there a role that philanthropy can play in addressing these, really burgeoning inequities in Austin?
Yeah, I want to say that I think it's important to be a healing component as a philanthropic organization. You never want to enter into a community and think you're just going to lay this funding over them and everything is going to be okay after that. There's a lot of hurt, there's a lot of pain that occurs within communities, especially when things like gentrification happens. There are dreams and visions and history that's ran over, and so I think coming in, listening, engaging, and doing your best to be a healing factor instead of just a growth factor, because you kind of have to start from where the pain is. And so I think that will allow you to kind of avoid the negative connotation to gentrifying any type of area. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to add too, I think one of the things that funders have the capacity to do that are very unusual, kind of like what you're doing here, is to convene people, but not be the center of the conversation. Mm-hmm. In other words, my experience was the best grant maker was the one who was more facilitative and was less visible. Because the thing is, what your resources are is you can actually create spaces for conversations that are hard to have. And there's also, the idea that the way in which that can be pulled together is you draw on your partners and your allies and say, how can we support a conversation that is difficult to have, and can we give you resources, can we put something on the table to make it possible for people to even get there? And so convening is a really powerful tool.
I know we have a lot of questions coming in from the audience this morning, which we love. So I'm going to turn to Courtney and hear what people want to know.
Thank you. So one thing, many of you are texting in paragraphs. It's 250 characters. So it seems like you have good questions.
This is an engaged audience.
It seems like you have good questions, but I can't get to the question. So try to shorten it. But how can people of color and marginalized communities be philanthropists without having generational wealth?
Ooh, I can answer that one.
Suheila's ready for that.
Yeah, I literally just had this conversation recently. I do not come from a community of wealth, so I will have to say that when I came to Austin, driving through some of the neighborhoods was like, whoa, And so, but I will say that what I quickly recognized in my own philanthropic journey, as a fundraiser, that one of the worst mistakes of many organizations is to discount the philanthropic efforts of, non-white communities. And the first thing that I think we have to recognize is that minority funding has been going on for hundreds of years. This didn't just come about. There are so many, one of my pet peeves is to kind of talk about something as if it's never happened. And I hear that a lot when it comes to finding those people of color who are willing to, to push thoroughly their philanthropic efforts. And it's kind of, to me, I kind of feel like they've already been here. You've heard of the NAACP, you've heard of the United Negro College Fund. Like, they're here, and they're willing to support communities of their own communities and communities that they don't belong to. You do have to do your due diligence in finding them and seeking them out the same way we do for staff or board members, but we absolutely just have to tap into that network. There are so many businesses and small businesses that are the founding members or the CEOs are people of color. Those are your resources. A lot of times I see there are so many sponsors out there, and very, little do I see that these companies are companies of color. And I think that we have to take accountability of that and recognizing that if we're not focused on that audience, then we're going to act like we never saw them.
So I think if you can whittle through the paragraphs, Courtney, you said you had a couple more good questions.
Do you feel that millennials and Gen Z engage in less philanthropy giving than older generations, and will this trend change or continue?
Well, they're trying to pay off their college debt. They don't have the money sometimes, but that's a good question. So just talk about Gen Z and the millennials and when it comes to philanthropy. Anybody want to weigh in on that one?
I'll weigh in. I would say that if they had, it's all about the mentors. I have a couple of mentors that are here. When I first came to Austin, I didn't know anything about, fundraising, and I think Carmine I don't know where he is. Where's he at? Carmine?
Carmine.
He took me under his wing and he taught me, I think, everything that he knows, right? No. But, and so I think for the millennials, and they would, if they could connect to the best of their ability and try to find as many mentors as they can better have that journey in regards to becoming a fundraiser or a volunteer and getting involved with Leadership Austin and other civic organizations, but really having that mindset of who can I connect with and who can be my mentor to help me learn the ropes.
Making those connections and volunteering, those are all important ways. Here's a national level picture question. How do you envision the future landscape and impact of philanthropy as it relates to advancing equity in communities nationally in the wide range spectrum of all of this?
So I can start. So for those of you who have heard of Brian Stevenson, he founded the Equal Justice Initiative, and there's a movie out now about his life, Just Mercy. That's a plug. But he says that the opposite of poverty is not wealth. The opposite of poverty is justice. And so what I would hope and envision for philanthropy is that we finally start to tackle root causes. If it's racism, call it racism. Call it what it is, name it, and then figure out how to work through it. I envision a future where we confront wicked problems from a multi-sectoral approach, and we stop working in our silos. So I think a lot about Brian Stevenson and how do we achieve justice, because that should be what we aim for. And in philanthropy, our goal should not be to fill food pantries. Our goal should be to solve hunger.
That philosophy and approach could solve a lot of problems, I think, in our country today. Anybody else want to weigh in on future landscape in the impact of philanthropy in advancing equity?
I would like to add that, we talk a lot about how do I fix the community? How do I save a community? And I would like to talk more and to dive more into how do we break down these systems that have enabled these communities to stay the way they are. We've got thousands of board members in this community, and they all live and work in different industries. And what if that, it's, you join the board, but also looking at where do you serve, and how can you help us break down some of these systems that are plaguing the communities that we're serving. And so by knowing where we all sit and how we can, together break down these systems from the board to the executives to the funders, it would be less about us trying to save and fix these organizations, but we are breaking down these systems so they can have a more meaningful life, and so they can afford a home, so they could afford to go to school, and they can provide for their families, and we can walk together and making sure that everyone has a more meaningful life and being able to provide and and just love their families and love their kids and just be better productive members of the community. But we really have to figure out how are we, as organizations, how are we really breaking down those systems and those institutions that really hold us down.
Sarah, you look like you had something to say. Or,
Oh, I have so much to say, but it's like, how does...
no, you have time.
I think, I agree, I completely agree with what you said, and also the idea of solving the root problem and not sort of putting a Band-Aid on it. The thing is, from the little worlds that I've navigated, I find what's really a barrier is the notion of how people see their expertise. So, for example, a lot of people who, at least one of the strategies that tend to happen in policy change is we need to get those lawyers. We need to do this litigation strategy. We need to do more research on this. We need to have thought leadership. We need to have pundits. And I think one of the problems is that people aren't mixing up in these activities that tend to have their routines and these kinds of things. So I think, to your point, I think it's important to figure out how to get out of the safety of the roles that we play in our everyday lives, mostly the work cultures of our everyday lives. And I also don't want to discount the role that universities and community colleges and schools can play. Students, I've been working with students for 11 years now, and I'm just really amazed at the energy they have, but they have no idea what the on-ramp is to this work. And especially those who are thinking, well, I want to take all this theory that I've got, all this incredible stuff that's happening in universities, intersectional theory and all these other things, but what do I do with that? How can I get involved? And that's really, there's a hunger for that visible ramp to something that actually has a practice component to get out of their heads and into the communities or back into the communities they came from. So I really agree with the points that you all have made. It's not easy, but it's really important to break out of those systems. Yeah.
Thank you, Becky. One more question from the audience. I think we have time for Courtney. If you've got a good one.
Sure.
They're all good, I'm sure.
Yeah. So you all have like different backgrounds. Can you speak to any mistakes that you have made along your way and any lessons learned, and how do you apply those lessons learned to the work that you're doing now?
I think everybody should answer that one. Who wants to start? Lessons learned from past mistakes. Becky's ready.
I just think it's all about really having a reflection, or having people tell you the truth, and opening yourself up to, and again, I'm speaking as the role that I had in philanthropy and also as a college professor, but now as a teacher here, working with practice, theory to practice kinds of things. And I think one of the things is that we don't necessarily, because of our various expertise, think that we need to go back to school. And I think that going back to school, for example, one of the to-dos of what can we do and how can you get involved, there's this really great program called the Rockwood Leadership Institute, and I actually went myself, and it was pretty transformative. I don't know if anybody's aware of it, but it's a way to take seriously a reflection on what it is that you thought you were trying to do, but you didn't do it so well, and also just to open yourself up to criticism and listen. So listening, as opposed to explaining, what I'm doing right now. Listening is one of the most important things we can try to do. So I can't imagine having done what I did without listening, and that was...
Could all be better listeners.
I'll say too that I think one of the lessons that I've learned is the need for me to be specific in what I want. I think that every time I'm extremely specific about what it is that I want, either some very thoughtful advice comes out and says, hey, let's think about that a little bit, or let's go ahead and dive in, right? And when I'm specific, I start to see connections in different places that I didn't expect, and I can kind of see the connections in all of these questions that are happening. As someone who doesn't come from wealth but is very invested in my philanthropic journey, or as a millennial, someone who's trying to help my community grow and heal. And then as someone who just wants to be a Black woman that's safe, in every space. I've been very encouraged when I see other individuals go after what they want to, be specific about it. And really quickly, I saw Impact Austin and Measure and the Lone Star Justice Alliance and a few other organizations collaborated recently to push back against adultification on Black girls. And I just said, wow, that's really specific. And I'm so grateful, and I can imagine like the voices behind that movement are extremely powerful. And I just love that they went in and they died for it, and the support was overwhelming. And so I'm hoping that I can continue to try my best to be a little bit more specific about what I want.
I think for me, there's a big disconnect between culture and philanthropy. And just being a foster kid, I wasn't in the Black community, right? So working at the school that I'm at now, I'm learning a lot about my culture, right? And so I wish that when I was in school that I would have studied African American history and Latino culture, right? So I could better talk about, what the scholars have said and what the authors have said, and so I can have deeper, better conversations with the funders that I'm in front of. So if they ask me, well, what more could I know about the communities, I could recommend these type of books or this type of literature, or make those connections in regards to who I'm connected with or becoming more connected with in my community, in the Latino and the Black community. And so I would go back to school and, study African American and Latino studies.
Denise?
I think for me, my biggest mistake that I've made over my entire life is I haven't been brave enough. I didn't have enough courage. I will say I finally found my voice last year at the age of 40, so watch out, I have a lot to say. But I came to St. David's Foundation about a little over 2 years ago from a national health funder, the largest one in the country. And I was one of 3 Hispanic individuals who worked there out of a staff of 300. And all 3 of us happened to leave at the same time, but that was my first entry into philanthropy, and I didn't want to become like the angry Mexican, asking the tough questions and the hard questions that we needed to ask ourselves. And so I feel very fortunate here in Austin that my colleagues of all varieties, inside and outside the foundation walls, have helped me find my voice and given me the room to ask those tough questions, such as, is this benefiting the community or is this benefiting us? And being able to put those questions on the table, and I don't feel like I'm coming across as the angry woman in the room, but it's coming from a place of love and respect, and I really do want to get to the root causes and be committed to the communities that we say we aim to serve. So find your courage, everyone.
While you're finding your voice, Denise, we're going to start our call to action, because we're going to start with you. So we always end our Leadership Austin Engaged Breakfast with a call to action, some actionable ways all of us can interact with this issue in our own lives. And I encourage each of you to give us that call to action. And we're talking about, call to action for funders, those who are trying to raise money, many in the room here are in that category, or even those of us who just want a better understanding of philanthropy in our community. And I'll begin with you, Denise.
So I think my call to action is really for funders and philanthropists. Start to support organizations led by people of color, led by women, and led by people who are differently abled. If you do not know how to support small to medium-sized grassroots organizations, cut them a check for cooperating support and get out of their way. And the second part of that, I would say, is do everything that you can to help communities tell their own stories.
Becky? Totally agree. From the perspective of somebody who's not in philanthropy, I think one of the best things you can do is start following the conversations in philanthropy. There are many different ways to do that. I can provide some resources, but I think following the conversations and what people are talking about and what they're learning and how they're learning is really important, as well as the practice conversations that are in the field. There's so much going on. I think there are, 83,000 or so on, philanthropic organizations in the States. Coming from Canada now, it's really exciting to see how much more there is here than there. But I think that being able to follow before joining is, I think, really important. So when you join the conversation, you join having been lurking for a bit, because that way you can figure out how to have the voice that's not going to be disruptive, but also adding value that I think is important. Again, listening more and not explaining too much, yeah.
Elias?
I told one of the teachers the other day that he's a philanthropist, and he's like, well, what do you mean? And when he came to the school years ago, we've been around 22 years, they said he would never be able to read past the 5th grade. And so not only did he graduate from high school, went to college, he came back and he's teaching our kids math. Remember they said he would never be able to read. So he's a philanthropist, and so I think my call to action to each and every one of us, regardless of what we hear and people saying that what we can't do, there's an opportunity for each and every one of us to become immersed. It's hard, right? And so figuring out your place and figuring out how can you chip away at becoming immersed in the community, we would be a better off community in regards to the outcomes and the outputs that we are trying to accomplish in this great city of Austin.
I would say my call to action would be to start at home. And what I mean by that is, well, for many of us who go to work in the philanthropic industry, I do recognize the importance and the value in having a conversation with your family members, whether it be a child, aunt, cousin, whoever it is, about what it is what their mission is in life, or the cause that they want to push forward. And I think that it is our duty, kind of being in this atmosphere, to push it out, to the people that we love the most. And I think that in my doing that, the conversation that we had in my family about philanthropy 15 years ago is completely different than the conversation now, and that's just because I force it on them, and we have really thorough conversations about, okay, well, this is a problem, who can we talk to, or what organization can we get involved with that'll help this issue, literally down to my younger sisters and my younger brothers, and finding ways for them to get engaged when they're at an age where they feel like they don't have control over many things. So empower them early, and recognize that there are a lot of connections that you have with others, and specifically with the ones in your own household. So continue to have that conversation.
Wonderful calls to action. We have a few reminders before we thank our panel and we all go out and pray for some sunshine to grace our city today. First of all, don't forget about the Alumni Corner. Beanie Coleman and Robin Birchfield are going to continue this conversation, and these are some really powerful, great ways to engage, and if any of you can stay, I encourage you to go to the Alumni Corner. Once again, this conversation will live on the Leadership Austin website, also on Decibel ATX, and if you want to just check it out on Facebook and share it, our website and our Facebook is Decibel ATX. The next Engaged Breakfast is Wednesday, March 11th, during spring break, I think. Or maybe it's before spring break, but around that time. It is a great one. It's one of my favorite ones of the year. Women in Leadership. He's assertive, she's aggressive, kind of echoing what Denise talked about just a second ago. So we hope you can join us on March 11th for our next Engaged Breakfast. And of course, lastly, I do want to thank Denise and Becky and Elias and Suhaila for such an engaging, gripping, just delightful conversation that I think we're all feeling a little bit better informed and more engaged on this topic today. So thank you. Go out and make it a great day, and we hope to see everyone right here in March. Thanks.